if it's appropriate to contact a planet openly, they will try to help that civilization solve their technological issues, but in a way that's not like, we're just here to give you answers and just here's our technology. Our technology has far surpassed our level of consciousness. And so we're abusing technology and using it for very destructive means.
Bashar has talked about exactly what you're saying, that nuclear weapons specifically have the ability to affect life on different planes of existence. So when you drop a nuke, you could kill and affect life in dimensions that have nothing to do with us.
I can tell you for a fact, TLS does have certain boxes that act as like Tesla free energy.
I know personally some people that work with this individual to get instructions on how to create free energy.
I'm Jason Shurka, and this is Hidden Revelations. Welcome back to Hidden Revelations. I'm your host, Jason Shurka. Sitting alongside me is Brandon Bozarth and Aaron Abke. In this episode, episode 3, we're going to be speaking all about secrecy and the freedom of choice. So, big picture. Secrecy nowadays has this really sort of dark idea around it. It's associated with evil people, evil organizations. We keep things a secret to suppress the people. And that is an absolute reality on one side of the coin. But there's a whole other side of the coin, a whole other reality associated with secrecy that isn't spoken about so much. And that's the fact that collectively, maybe there are some things that we are just not ready for. And in that way, holding things in secrecy may actually be to our benefit for the collective of humanity instead of to oppress humanity. It's almost like not giving a child a car to drive when that child is 8 years old. They may be able to reach the gas and the brakes, but they may crash. They may hurt people along the way because they're just not ready. And that's okay. That's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It just is. So today we're going to be connecting this idea of secrecy and how secrecy in many ways can preserve the freedom of choice, connected to the pyramid code, the law of one, the Bashar Material, and maybe some other texts that come along the way. So with that being said, before we continue bringing in some excerpts from these sacred texts, why don't we start with just our thoughts on secrecy and the freedom of choice in sort of the big picture aspect of it?
Yeah, this is a big part of the law of one that's called the law of confusion. And Ra refers to this many times in the text as really the first, they call it the first distortion of the law of one. In that it's what allows the positive path, at least, to preserve free will in whoever they're interacting with. So they will often say, if they're asked a question, can you tell us about XYZ? If they believe that that's an infringement in some way, they'll say, this breaks the law of confusion. And so I very much agree with what you had to say in that it can be just as detrimental in the way that we see, the negative polarity uses secrecy to hide and cover up their agenda of service to self. We can see it being just as detrimental if it's abused in the positive polarity by giving someone too much too soon before they're ready for it.
Yeah, it's really good. Bashar talks about relevancy and appropriateness. And like you said, with the car analogy, all of the extraterrestrial races have some form of free energy. So would you give free energy to a society that is currently killing each other, and has for the last 100 years? So they are, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a little bit, so I'll save some of it, but they are plugged into a higher intelligence where they can see the big picture. It's like being on the mountaintop and being able to see a multitude of variables all interacting, almost like from the higher mind perspective. So they're operating, and Bashar, I'll explain more later in this episode, but Bashar explains how they only allow themselves to access information if the information unto of itself is relevant and appropriate. Mm-hmm. So when someone asks Bashar, can you answer this? If it's not appropriate, Bashar will not receive the information because Bashar is in an agreement with his higher mind that says, I'm going to keep information that is inappropriate, and I'm going to take cues from their higher mind, and we're having conversations on this level to decide what information is appropriate for this individual. And because Bashar's civilization is so transparent, because they're so evolved, the ego cannot get in the way of that. It can't say, oh man, I'm lacking information, or, oh, well, maybe I'll make something up, or it's just, they are in 100% knowing and service of that higher intelligence.
Absolutely. So on the other side of that coin is also sometimes people do hold information and they simply through the freedom of choice to preserve our freedom of choice collectively, don't let that out. And sometimes people are like, well, why would you do that? Why would you not give us something if you have something so powerful? And the free energy analogy was a really good example of that. There's a lot of talk, especially when it comes to the pyramid code, rays of light, TLS, when it comes to codes and documents being encrypted with certain codes, whether it's the pyramid code, rays of light, that book that will come out eventually, the Old Testament, and many other books that are out there that are encrypted and have these codes embedded within them that are pretty much a form of technology.
Yeah.
And in the pyramid code, there's actually a portion that says the following. The pyramid code was not a secret at this point in time, referring to ancient Egypt.
Right.
As time passed, it turned to become a secret since the pharaoh rulers abused the power given to them and were no longer to be trusted. And the reason why that's so relevant in today's day is just like the free energy example. If something is given right now that certain people will abuse, then although it exists and although it can do incredible work and help us progress incredibly very, very quickly, it may not be the best time to do it. And that's where I would say secrecy probably holds a really powerful and positive hold in regards to how it's being exercised. And in many cases, that's how TLS does their things, where I know that TLS and I know Ray does have certain codes. I mean, they wrote these documents according to the knowledge of these codes. And I don't have the codes, but to my knowledge of them, one who does understand and is taught these codes, you can pretty much see it as like a form of technology. When you gain access to that, it gives you a very, very wide level of power. And if that power falls into the wrong hands, it can be abused, just like it was 3,000-4,000 years ago by the pharaohs. And I'm sure many other societies even further back then. So I see this time in modern day as being a repetition of history and us learning from the mistakes that we did in the past to make sure they don't repeat themselves once again.
Right.
So with that being said, in Rays of Light, the text that is not yet out in its entirety, but is coming out in portions and hopefully will come out sooner rather than later. There's a portion that really speaks to me in regards to freedom of choice, how that works and how that's exercised to really help us instead of hurt us. And the line goes as follows. In Rays of Light, it says, the freedom of choice is yours. And if I prove anything to you in advance, if I give you all the elements of the universe and its secrets, without any work done on your end, your freedom of choice will no longer be a free choice, but a biased choice. And I bring that up now because I know in the law of one, there are many portions where they ask a question and there is no answer.
Oh, yeah.
Can you speak more about that in regards to the material and the freedom of choice?
Yeah. Well, I think the important part about this topic is that the creator's trying to have an organic experience of itself. And so if somebody else gives me knowledge that I haven't learned through my own lived experience yet, that's what's considered infringement. And I can actually make decisions based on information I haven't experienced for myself that might actually slow down or interfere with my own evolution. And so that's why the positive polarity not only honors and protects free will, but is actually polarizes by doing so. So when positive social memory complexes, which is the word for basically a group mind, as civilizations evolve telepathy, they have the ability where everyone can share thoughts amongst each other. Mm-hmm. So that's where free will or free choice becomes very different once we can access all of one another's mind and thoughts equally. Because now I basically have learned all the lessons you've learned. And so our mind becomes much greater in its capacity and the abilities that we can perform together. So in the fourth density, positive social memory complexes will travel through the galaxy looking for planets, specifically third density planets like ours, who are in these transition periods where, you know, our technology has far surpassed our level of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And so we're abusing technology and using it for very destructive means and selfish means.